welcome everybody to the District of Unity. We are doing the business perspective with Marc Levin. He
Hello.
is the resident expert on business related items, HR related items, you name it, he got it, he knows it. How are you, Marc?
I'm good. That was quite the introduction. Hopefully I can live up to it.
I'm sure you will, and everybody will respect all of your opinions.
Yeah.
So, how have you been handling COVID since the crisis, and how are things going around the world of business in your view?
What I tell people,
Well,
what I tell people in my orientations is, you ever watch Gordon Ramsay or any cooking shows?
I've had.
So Gordon Ramsay said it best: all failing or poor restaurants no longer exist now because COVID killed them off. So COVID taught us to either adapt or you don't survive.
Right.
And a lot of businesses that I've worked in recently
Right.
had failed to adapt or partially adapt, and they're struggling.
Okay.
And other businesses that are adapting are thriving. So it really is, it really just depends on, a lot of it has to do with leadership. But yeah, I think my answer to that question would just be, it really just depends on your industry and your leadership with COVID.
Almost sound like the transition from online stores from brick and mortar stores, like how Sears and Montgomery Ward kind of like faded into the sunset, and Amazon and people like that took their place and all.
Yes.
If you don't adjust, you're pretty much out the door, so to speak.
I mean, it was a commonplace to be to have delivery food like a HelloFresh or a Blue Apron, as it is nowadays, or people just order food and they drop it at your door, and that's considered normal.
I know. You know what? You know what was so funny about that you bring it up? It was like when they first started it down here in Florida, it was like, oh, it's not going to last past COVID. I'm like, are you kidding me? They're going to take advantage of this over and over again, because once they figure out you can have stuff delivered to your job, you can have it delivered to your home, that has taken away at least an hour and 20 minutes for you to go to the store and buy all that stuff yourself.
Yep.
So, and it's only going to get bigger. Now they're trying to implement drones and so forth. So let me ask you, from an HR perspective, when it comes to the hiring process, does COVID have anything to do with the hiring process, or I guess with scheduling and, work, I guess the office environment and so forth? How is that different now with COVID versus pre-COVID?
Well, let me take a step back, because anyone who's watching this video is going to think, who is this guy and what is his credentials and what is he all about, right?
Tell them.
So I have an MBA. I did do something positive during COVID. I acquired my MBA. I'm in HR management. I have 13 years experience in the HR world. So I've worked in grocery, I've worked in banking, I've worked in home care, and I'm a teacher. So I do have a variety of different backgrounds as to what I do. So when I worked in the grocery industry, that was way before COVID. And all of my everything in person. Everyone would come in, schedule everything in person. Remote work wasn't even considered a thing.
Right.
Same when I first started in home care. But then near the end of my career in home care is when COVID actually hit. And that's when you had to adapt. It was scary, just because they considered my kind of job, which was, in HR, an essential worker's job. But I wasn't the one going and working with patients. I was just on my phone scheduling and hiring.
Right.
I didn't have to go in the field, but our business at that time made us come into the office anyway.
Okay.
It made us come in and consider that we are essential workers. But a lot of people, that made them nervous, because that was at the time when it just started. No one knew what we were dealing with. And it was just a lot of fear.
Right.
A lot of fear in general of what was going on at the time, because it was just people trying to make ends meet. I remember specifically at that job, our supervisor said, you have three options right now. You can come to work, you can use your PTO, or you can quit.
Whoa.
So that kind of shows you what I don't, if it wasn't for COVID, I probably would have worked in that company longer, but that really showed me quickly what kind of people I was dealing with there when I first started. So We got through it, but we didn't do remote anything until near the end of my tenure there.
Were they
And then,
set to able? Were they able to do
oh
remote?
yeah, yeah. But
Okay,
there's a difference between being able and trusting your employees, and they didn't trust
true.
their employees. So, which is another thing with COVID. COVID brought with the whole remote thing.
Right,
Companies that actually trust their workers are more open to remote learning. Remote learning. I'm a teacher. Remote. This remote in general for remote work.
right,
So, like, I currently work a hybrid model because my current company adapted. They never did that before, but they know to retain talent, you have to adapt.
right.
Um, in my last company I worked at, it was sad for me because, especially focusing on recruiting, I had a lot of great, quality, talented people leave the company because our leadership was not willing to bend at all and letting them work from home, not do a hybrid or nothing. Their mindset was, we're paying for the lights to be on, you have to be in this room.
Right.
And we lost people just because they wouldn't bend. And it was sad for me to see them go. That was the only reason. It wasn't a money issue. It
Mhm.
wasn't anything. It was just they didn't want to commute because people were like, we're saving money on gas. We're proving we can be effective from home.
Right.
So why do we have to change that? Or at least we can compromise and maybe do a hybrid thing, which I think is the most appropriate.
Right.
But I've also worked with companies who are working now 4 days a week. I didn't work for one personally. I've worked with them. They're working a model where they're 4 days a week, no Fridays. They want to see how that goes with their employees. And no surprise, they're IT companies and they just laid off like half their workforce. So I don't know. I don't know how that's going. But
Well, on my end, just to give
mhm,
people perspective, I was already out of the workforce because I already had my company set up.
mhm.
Basically, do a lot of technology work. I do a lot of delivery work and so forth. So the changes with me, this is how funny it was. When COVID first hit, I had to have a letter to say that I had to be outside before, DeSantis got rid of, the regulations and
Yeah,
I guess you call it curfews and so forth, because you had
yeah,
to be out but up until 6 p.m. And then 6 p.m., if you had no reason to be out there, they could pull you over, fine you, whatever. I was like, are you serious?
yep,
So I had to get a letter and basically said that I have the authority from the state of Florida to actually be out to do my deliveries and so forth, which was fine. And I had worked with the state of Florida just before then in law enforcement. So it was kind of easy for me to go through the channels and so forth. And nobody knew what it was. It was like, is this something like you've seen in the movies where it's going to kill off all of the population? Or is
mhm,
this something that we're going to find a cure for quick and so forth?
yeah,
It's neither, but it's both, because I guess it's just the way everybody's handling it, like you said. So
yeah.
getting back to the office environment, did any company that you work for required you to get the vaccine?
Oh yeah, well, my current company does.
Okay,
Which I'm all for. And
right.
I interview tons of people. So if they're not willing to do it, I don't hold anything personal against them. It's just not going to work out for our company.
Exactly.
Um, my last company didn't work. They didn't require it. They didn't really care. That's kind of a theme I have for that one, but they didn't really, and like I said, I'm not going to mention anybody by names.
Right.
So,
You don't have to. Yeah.
but no, but it really just is that they treated it more as we're going to do whatever the state is mandating us to do.
Okay.
My current company is more like we want everyone in our company to get it because they feel that it'll make everyone safer, which is great.
Right.
And me being married to a doctor, that is something that I also agree.
That's
So yeah,
awesome.
during the whole COVID thing, that was a whole thing too, with
Right.
just seeing everything that she had to go through during because she was working in the hospitals right near the start of it, not at the very start, but in the middle. Like, she wasn't that first wave that was unfortunately taking um patients out and, like, for lack of better terms, out into the truck, like in a
Right.
body bag. Like, she wasn't that bad,
Right.
but she still was seeing a lot, and it was very scary. So we were at the point we were even wearing masks in the house because she was so scared about everything. But long story short, it really just I'm sorry, I think I went off track there. What was, what was
He was talking about what she was going through and so forth, and I
yeah.
think that's interesting. I think you should delve into it. I mean, how
Well, she's still dealing with it because COVID's still a thing. It's not over yet. They never went on the news and said the pandemic's over yet. We're
right,
just all acting like it's over with because we're done with it.
right, right.
But she's
So,
still there's still people actively dying from COVID in the hospital.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. I mean,
Yeah.
how I guess how was it presented to her about the disease and so forth? Was it a CDC thing that she had received? Is it something from the state, or is it just a whole glut of people started going?
She had a text message chain with all of her fellow doctors that said COVID test dummies. Because she just felt like they were thrown into the fire and whatever happened happened.
Right.
Because they had no idea what was going to happen while we were going through all of that. So
How's she handling everything now? I mean, how is she now?
no, she's okay.
Good.
She's okay, especially being that we are, we're up higher from Florida.
Right.
The higher you get from Florida, the more I'd say restrictive things get. And I'll give you an example. So my last company, during lockdown period or whatever you want to call it, we had New York. New York is a whole different animal. New York and California have much different regulations from every other state in the country.
Okay.
Connecticut and Illinois somewhat as well, but New York and California for sure have different laws that you have to obey. So like during a lot of COVID issues that we were having with staffing, at one point, New York City is different from New York State. So New York City was mandating that every single employee who worked in the city had to have the vaccine. Otherwise, they had a certain number of time to get it, or we had to fire them.
Right.
So that was only in the city, and I wasn't in the state. So unfortunately, during that time, we did have to let somebody go. But then shortly after that, they got rid of that rule because people were kind of making things up as we went along. And then unfortunately, we lost like another good employee because of that. But it was just a different mindset of how different states handle this type of situation.
Right.
Which is another reason why I looked to leave my last company, because it was just too many states and too many mandates and too many regulations to keep track of for the small team that I worked in.
Right. So is it so do the company have to abide by all of the state regulations, or is this one of those things where it's kind of an implied thing like, okay, we put this out here, you have to do this in order to stay open, or we will highly suggest aggressively that you do these policies?
Well, at that time it was mandated, but now it's more of you have to do what the state tells you to do for the most part.
Right.
And right now, most states are just saying we strongly suggest you to do this, but we're not going to shut you down if you don't.
Right. Not like it was 2 years ago.
No, no, not at all.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that's a big misnomer across the country that I'm glad that you're in Pennsylvania, because it's like now you can actually tell what's happening, because I think a lot of times you hear on the news, on one side of the aisle, you hear all of these things that a state like Pennsylvania is doing. Some other parts, it's like, oh no, they're not even close to doing that. And I think, being right in the middle of it, you really want to hear the truth, what is actually happening in some of these states, because like Florida, you have a lot of folks that's coming into Florida. I mean, the population jumped like 60% over the last year and a half. And I think the population will decrease by 30% in the next year and a half, because a lot of people get down here, they don't like the weather, they don't like the summertime, 11 months out of the year, stuff like that.
I agree.
And they find out how expensive Disneyland is, or Disney World and Universal.
I don't know how you do it. We just did a family vacation to Florida, and the weather was just too much for us. Don't go to Florida in July, if anyone.
Yeah, matter of fact, I'll say don't go to Alaska in July.
It was like 110 degrees.
Hotter than us. So,
see, what's interesting about the state of Pennsylvania is it's like 3 different states in one state. Have you ever driven across the whole state?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's like Philadelphia's its own world, Lancaster and Harrisburg's its own world, Pittsburgh's its own world.
Correct.
So it's like a microcosm for the whole country in that one little drive. Kind of, because if you've driven the whole country too, which I've kind of done, I want to finish it, but if you drive from like Pittsburgh to Missouri, it's the same kind of feel city.
Mhm.
Then it's just flat for a while and there's
Oh, yeah.
nothing, and then there's city again. So, yeah.
That's why I enjoyed my 50 state tour so much. I'm glad I did it just before COVID because I got in Alaska out of the way. What was that, 2018? As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, I got it a week before my mother had passed away. So I was really glad that I did it then. So she
Mhm.
could say, "Yay, you did it," so forth. But so let's get past all of the COVID stuff.
With pleasure.
Oh yeah, I mean, but I think people needed to hear, what was going on in the state other than Florida, other than California,
Yeah.
because, the news to me, they always drum things up to a certain degree just to get eyeballs on the screen. They inflate
Mhm.
some numbers, they pull from data sources you never even heard of, and so forth. And I always think on both the left and the right, they're just trying to scare you, play your insecurity against you. You know, I have no problem with people getting the shot. I
Mhm.
also do not have problems with people not getting the shot.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, depending on where we are in this, you have to do what you have to do.
Yeah.
And there's consequences to what you do.
Hmm.
And I'm not here to determine that either side, because this is your show, not mine.
That's all good.
So getting past COVID, what does the hiring process look like now? Are you finding more candidates or are you finding less candidates? Because the biggest complaint, like here, it's hard to find people to work. And then when you find people to work, they don't last long. They just decide, all right, I'm done. I'm going, after a month, I quit.
Now, from a recruiting perspective, especially where I'm at, and I recruited for the whole country, so I can even tell you spots of Florida that were challenging for me, especially in my last company. I recruited for several different cities in Florida.
Right.
No, this is like they say it's like a seller's or a buyer. What do they say? It's a seller's market in the housing industry because they
Correct.
can make a lot. So it's how it is, right? People who want to look for a job right now can pick and choose and negotiate kind of what they want and ask for more money because there's more people than there are jobs, especially from what I've been experiencing.
Okay.
So people who haven't been looking hard enough or just don't want to, people can pick what they want to do right now. They don't have to do certain things. No one really feels obligated like they have to do certain things right now,
Right.
depending on what kind of job you're looking for.
Okay.
But from a recruiting perspective, I could post a job today and tomorrow I'll have like 20 applicants for it, depending on the role. Are they qualified? That's a different story, but people are certainly applying.
Mhm.
And it's my job to try to go through and find people who are qualified. And that's what's my challenge right now. I'm learning a new industry because I just started a new position in a different company. But recruiting is recruiting
Yeah, it's always
wherever
going to
you're
be
at.
that way.
So when I was recruiting for Florida, I was having lots of issues, specifically in the Orlando area.
Right.
We had and also this past year when the hurricane hit down there, I was responsible for helping the staff for that.
Okay.
Because we would do like my own company would do hurricane like staffing, but I would mainly just focus on temporary staffing for that. But they
Right.
would pull people from the main areas to help with the cleanup effort for that kind of industry. But it was definitely a challenge. But the long story short, I would say is definitely from a recruiting perspective, people who want to work can find jobs.
Oh,
They're out.
absolutely.
It's just it just depends on the market really for each job that you're looking for, because you could be applying and 10, 15 people are just like you and qualified. So then people get upset they don't hear back quick enough or whatnot. But there's a lot of behind the scenes that goes into preparing a job and the interview process. And sometimes it takes too long. Sometimes it's really quick. It's just hit or miss in that regard. But it's not as simple as just me posting a job and hoping someone applies. There's lots of back end work that goes into trying to find qualified people to apply as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, our qualifications for jobs changing, such as college degrees not required, other types of disciplines in colleges are, I guess, just to show that the candidate is capable of coming into a business environment and so forth. Because starting to hear stuff like that on the news now that companies and corporations are starting to lower the standards to entry.
That's one thing that's good about what I'm working at right now is we're a pace car, we're not a race car in my
Right.
current company. So I do have the luxury of not having to just hire somebody to hire somebody. I can sort through people, and I do have time in this current company to find quality people. In my last position, I was basically looking for bodies just to fill, because our turnover was so incredibly high that I just had to find as many people as possible to keep our business moving.
Okay.
Which can be, so the answer to your question is, it really depends on the industry with the education level. Now, for someone like me, getting an MBA and trying to go and work my way up because I'm still younger and trying to move in HR, it certainly helps
Right.
to be able to get into a position like that. But the problem with today's market is most people who graduate with an education are automatically wanting the salary of having an education without the experience.
Exactly.
So people with an MBA like I was wouldn't be willing to accept a job for $45,000 or $50,000 a year just to gain the experience to then move up later. Sometimes you have to gain the experience, and then your education doesn't go bad. Your education, there's no expiration date on getting a master's degree. You just have to make your experience meet your education standards. But a lot of people in today's market expect to get it without the experience, or sometimes they even do get it without the experience because companies just love what they have to offer. It really just depends on what you're looking at.
Exactly. What would your recommendation be for a candidate that's applying now? How would they have to groom themselves to get into some of these companies? Let's just say, and I'm not trying to bring up COVID, but it did change how the attitudes are for a lot of workers coming in, because you have cultural issues now that you didn't have before. Like, they're looking for companies that have their values instead of changing their values to the company. So how is the recruiting different in that aspect? I mean, is it organizational perspective, or are you looking at the candidates? Let's just say you have 50 candidates saying, well, you guys don't support this. How can I work here? Obviously they've gone through the interview process. And mind you, a lot of this is hearsay, but you hear it on mainstream media. So I'd like to hear the ground floor, view of what's really happening out there when candidates are applying.
I've personally never experienced any kind of negativity like that because I really value and respect people. So whatever even if you're like a restaurant worker and you decide to apply to become CEO of the company, obviously you're not qualified for that position. I don't have to tell you that, but I'll still be courteous and send you an email just to say I got your information, I have it on file, and we'll go from there. It's just all about communicating. It really is all. I didn't really have the bandwidth to do that as much as I would have liked in my prior companies, but I can do that now. Which is why I wanted to focus on the candidate experience, because whether they get the job or not, they're still going to reflect on what their experience was like recruiting and interviewing at that company.
Absolutely.
So if they interview for a job with me and then I tell them you didn't get it, but I'm going to hold your stuff on file in the future and thank you for your time, they're probably not going to be as angry as if I completely ignore them. And then then they'll just be like, well, this company doesn't reach out to us. And then they'll just have negative comments or whatnot. But from my perspective, I haven't really had any type of people coming at me and yelling, but because I really do I value people and I try to communicate with them. They might not be happy with me if I tell them they didn't get the job, but then I'll tell you, especially if you're an internal person, I'll tell you that someone else got the position, but you're still a valuable member of our team and I want you to learn and grow with us. And, I'd rather we work together on this, because it really doesn't come down to this person or this person is better than each other. It's just one may have been a little more qualified, but the other person is still excellent, but they still just need some experience. Doesn't matter, it doesn't matter a race, that doesn't matter. What matters strictly is qualifications of the person. That's all that matters.
Exactly.
So that's what my team focuses on. It's what we all focus on. It's just important to do that. It's all about communicating. If you get complaints from anybody, it's going to be because they were communicated with.
Absolutely. So, usually in a lot of hiring based decisions, there's always fit versus qualification. So
Mhm.
who ultimately makes the decisions most of the time as you see it over the years? Is it the hiring manager? Is it, you know, the recommendation of the HR person? I mean, how does that dynamic work, or is that just by position or
No, I mean, like, for example, my current company, I recruit for all the positions, right?
right?
So I am your initial impression into the company, and I have to sell you on the company as much as you have to sell me on yourself.
Exactly.
So then once you sell me on yourself, then if I really am excited about you as a candidate, then I will present that candidate to a manager of that role and to see if they want to then take them to do an interview. And if they like them at that point, that's what they make the factor. It's basically I'm the first impression. My job is to kind of weed through people because no one else has time to do it. So my job is to go through the people. They call that sourcing.
Right.
So you ever see a job out there it's called sourcing? It's not sorcerer, like my wife was saying, it's sourcing. So there are jobs out there. The companies, some companies are so big that the person's sole job is to just go through applicants and then get those applicants and send them to the recruiter because even the recruiters don't have time to go through the candidates. So that's a job in itself. It's just called sourcing. So, but what I like to do is I like to go through the candidates. I like to do it myself, especially in a company that I'm at smaller now than what I'm used to, which is nice.
Right.
Because I can do the individual attention to it. So you go through each person, I pick them, I screen them, and then it depends on the role. For most positions, I can just send them to the manager next. And then if they want to do an additional interview, depending on if after the second interview, they meet with a VP or something like that.
Right.
It's just a combination of things. But my initial interview, it's a collaboration effort. It's not just I interview someone, they're hired. It has to meet with the team.
Absolutely.
And the same thing with every company I've been with has been the same in that regard. It's the initial interview, and then it's a group meeting with the hiring manager. My cat might join this meeting in a second, by the way. He's decided he wants to come over. So if you see a cat walking through, don't be alarmed. He likes to do this when I'm on calls at home all the time too, and be invited.
That doesn't, you know.
So but long story short, it's a huge collaboration effort, and the companies that don't collaborate are the ones that are just getting people that's how you might get somebody who's extremely unqualified in the role because they don't really know where to put people. But that's the kind of issues when you work in larger companies. Because I have experience from working in like a mom and pop, and then I have experience working in a company that was nationwide and in several different two different countries. So it's a good experience. I've never worked a global company yet, but that was my closest, and I'm okay not going back to that world. It's just too broad. Like if you work for a Google or something like that, no, I did not work for Google, but if you ever worked for a company that big, it's
Right.
just hard to keep track of people when you're that big.
Oh yeah.
But that's how you get people that are going through the system. Because I saw a story the other day that was kind of misleading, where someone thinks that you apply with your resume,
Right.
and then like an algorithm reads your resume and like deduces the hiring based on an algorithm, which
Mhm.
is mind-boggling to me.
Right.
Because I read every single resume I go through. Like I'm a human and I go through the resumes, but I guess certain companies of a certain size would have to do that.
So that would be interesting to figure out, like, and I need to ask my daughter about that because she actually works for Google. Do they have
Mhm.
an AI resume reader that goes through there?
Maybe.
She's
I
not
wouldn't be surprised because of how big they are.
right. I mean, even though she's not in HR, she does the YouTube stuff. And is that a Mr. or a Mrs. Cat there?
That's Pete.
Pete.
He likes to be
Pete,
involved in
I
all my
haven't
meetings.
seen Pete in years. I
Yeah.
remember you, Pete. So
Yeah.
what's going on, Pete?
He just likes to be involved in every call I have.
That's
Now
awesome.
he and now
How
he's
old
not
is he
gonna
now?
he's gonna be 10 years old soon.
My goodness, man. So he must have been like 3 when I saw him.
Yeah, when I adopted him, he was 2.
Okay, so yeah, it was probably like a year right after that.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
he just every meeting I have, he likes to be involved.
That's not gonna work. So let me ask you, what is the difference between a candidate interview and an executive interview? Is there more involvement? Like if you had an interview for like a SVP or, you know, or the CEO, are you even in that process, or is that a whole nother stream that goes through HR?
I could probably give you a better example of my last company because it was bigger, and I was hiring from, hourly workers, $15 an hour, all the way up to like 180, $200,000 employees.
Right.
When it comes to the higher level people, it really does depend. So sometimes, most of the time, I will do the initial screening unless we have to hire an outside agency to help us.
Okay.
Just because sometimes if you need a really niche person for a very specific job,
Right.
for example, like an engineer or something very specific that you need certain skills to complete the position.
Right.
I have experience working with outside agencies to help with that kind of need, which every company I've worked for has done that.
Okay.
If they have that, but it's a huge expense. So if I hired you for $100,000, they would want 20% of that as a hire. So they want $20,000 just to use that kind of service, but sometimes you have to pay it. And to answer your question, I would work with those agencies and I would screen the candidates they would send to me, and then I would recommend them over to the leadership team who would be interviewing for that role, as an example. So my kind of position always comes down to the initial, regardless of the person. And then it's up to the next level. It's usually the people who are going to be either that person will report to,
Right.
or their team, or a combination of both, depending on the company and how many interviews they want to do. I've had a company where I had to go 3 interviews for one position. I've had a company where I had to do 4 interviews for a position. And then it's a lot of drawn out interviews. So nowadays companies can do that easier because you can interview from your car on your phone, which is how I got my last job, because I took advantage of the world we're in right now and I adapted. And when I decided I wanted to start looking for a job, I just started applying and doing interviews from my car.
Right.
Because how easy is that?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I do the same thing when I plug people for, whatever contractor role that is.
Yeah.
So what, and this is going backwards now, what made you choose the line of going into HR? What drew you to that side of the house, so to speak?
This world chose me, Carl.
I see.
I never signed up. I went to school for being an elementary school teacher.
Okay.
I got my teaching degree.
Right.
And then I graduated in 2009 during the Great Recession.
Right.
And all I was doing was substitute teaching, and I couldn't get a job. And my dad said, "You got to get out of the house." And then I got a cashiering job. 9 months later, my boss was like, "Do you want a full-time job? You want to work at HR?" And I went home and I was like, "Dad, I don't know if I want to do this." And he's like, "Get out of the house and take the full-time job." So I took the job because that was what was offered to me at the time. And as a 23-year-old kid, that was decent money at the time. Absolutely. And then kind of just evolved from there. And then I've been trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, probably up until the last few months when I got the job I'm in now. Which is exciting because have you ever heard of a PI before?
Explain the acronym.
Basically preventative index is it's just like a cognitive exam that I send candidates to take.
Oh, I've heard people.
Yeah. So I like to say, because basically when I took that on my own, it came back that I should be doing the line of work that I'm doing. So I was letting it kind of verified to me that I indirectly picked the right thing. It took me 13 years, but I picked the right thing because I was in different aspects of HR. Right. I've done almost everything in HR except for like benefits for the most part, which I'm not an expert in at all. Okay. But I have worked with people for that. I know how to get you to people who can help with that. But it's just a lot of that's how I got into this role. And then the variety, I've worked for profit, nonprofit, family owned, corporate, a lot of different kind of industries, and I'm still just starting my career, honestly.
Yeah. All right. Let's have some fun now. All right. So for a while there, I noticed you were rooting for Philadelphia. Then you started rooting for Baltimore Ravens. Who's your actual team, and who are you rooting for now? Or you're not in the sports anymore?
I root for my hometown team, the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know what you're talking about.
Man, I saw all that stuff before with you having the Raven stuff up there, and I was like, all right,
Well, I'll root for universe. No, I root for who pays me. So, when you're, and I lived in Pittsburgh for a little bit, so I like the Steelers at that time too. But they didn't pay me, but it's okay.
Right.
No, but I always support. I will go. I will wear whatever hat you tell me to wear if you pay me. I'm good. I'm really not loyal to anybody when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Well, it's kind of hard because, I've said free agency killed everything, but then if I had to take an HR perspective on it, it's like, hell, if I'm a free agent and I want to play over here and I want to play with this team, I'm going to go ahead and take the money and run.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
a championship's a champion. I mean, I would love to compete for a championship, but I also would love to have my family financially stable forever too. Exactly. That's a championship in its own right there.
Nothing like Gen Wealth, right?
No, I don't blame any professional athlete who takes any kind of contract while they can, especially because their careers are much shorter. Because I always like to tell, like my wife's like, I can't believe that baseball player is making $300 million. I'm like, yeah, but do you know how much revenue he brings in to the team? Because he's bringing in so much revenue into the team, and then each game might be $1 million gate, and then they can take that home. So they pay for themselves in the long run. It's a whole fantasy world. I mean, it's not even real money with how they do that kind of thing. And an interesting story about the PI too, which I learned recently. PI, it's a very powerful tool, and I definitely suggest people look into it. My current company is the only company I ever had that really invested in it because it's very expensive. But if you remember the draft with Jared Goff and Carson Wentz,
yes,
do you remember that draft?
I remember the draft.
So the Los Angeles Rams partially picked Jared Goff over Carson Wentz because of his PI results.
You know what? I remember that story. Now that you talk about it, yeah.
Yeah. So I learned that. So since he performed better than Carson did on that test, which is true because he's still in the league and Carson's going to be a backup for years to come now, if he's even in the league next year.
I mean, because what is this, his third team that done dumped him? Because
he's an example too. Here's a funny story I heard on the radio the other day that you might find interesting. Carson Wentz, up until how many grades? There's 12 grades and then 4 years of college. So 16 years of education. He never got a grade less than an A in his entire education.
Interesting.
So he never understood what failure was. And so that's why it's always important. If you don't get a job the first time, you keep trying. If you don't pass the test, you have to learn from it, keep trying. Otherwise, you become a Carson Wentz, and when you fail for the first time in your life, you never recover. So you have to learn. That's a skill. You gotta recover.
It's funny, but it's sad at the same time. I mean, He's not hurting because obviously he's paid in full, but there's something to it when you mention it that way, that it's like intelligence-wise and school-wise, he never had that grade below that A that you was talking about, but yet he's been cut from, 3 different teams now?
Yeah, and like when I was looking for my current position I accepted recently, I was applying to jobs every day, and I was getting rejection emails every day. Like, it doesn't matter. You just need one to say yes. It's just like dating. So that's what, like, it really is, because there's so many jobs out there and there's so many different avenues you can take. I applied to jobs right out of my league too. I applied to be something in the Phillies, like a high-end position. And I'm like, I can't get this job, but why not? I'll just apply. You got to make it, it's a numbers game, and you have to make it work for you. And then, but don't sell yourself short either. You have to value what you are. So, like, people are going to always try to lowball. Well, not always, but they're going to try to lowball people, and then you have to counter. And it's always an awkward thing when you get to money. So when I screen people, I always talk about money up front, because I want to get that out of the way, because I don't want to waste your time either.
Exactly.
So that's kind of what I like to do. And internal is a little bit different. If you're moving people around internally, that's a little bit of they're already employees, so you can talk about money a little bit differently with them. But I'm talking strictly externally, people you're hiring from scratch outside.
And one of the problems I've always had with working with a company directly was what you're talked about. It's just the range and sometimes the career track that you're put on.
Mhm.
I was an accountant. I was a financial analyst. But what is my main specialty? IT. So at the company that I was with, it was like I would get every other job except something in information services or information technology. And I'm like, this is asinine. You know, I have this high end degree with IT, and all they see me is as an accountant or finance. I know people that would have killed to get into the roles that I was in, but I
Mhm.
didn't want it because that wasn't my passion. You
Yeah.
know, it was kind of like, hey, Carl, why don't you come work for me, blah, 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 on the side. And then
Mhm.
I'm like, maybe that's a good idea. Let me just go ahead and do it. And I wasn't necessarily happy with that role, you know.
Yeah.
And you work with some companies where they almost predestine you to do certain things. They'll see some quality in you that you don't see in yourself and all of this other
Mhm.
stuff. So I guess you have to take it as a compliment, but then if it's not your passion, it's not going to work. And it's getting to what you're saying, that mental capability of saying, look, I'm not going to give up just because this person said no. Just like you
Mhm.
said with dating, it's
Yeah.
funny with that. I'm gonna transition over to data real quick. It's funny how a lot of women back in the day would tell me no, and then you had that one that said yes, and it's like, yeah, that's my girlfriend or whatever. I find myself telling a lot of women no now.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
because if you say that, I'm gonna get in trouble with my wife because they're just gonna think I just accepted her because she's the first person to say yes. That's not true. That's not true at all. That's not
not
true.
at all.
No, because that's why I'm saying you have to also agree to it and have the connection, whether it's to your spouse or your job. Like you can't just. I want. I before I accepted the job I have now, I turned down several jobs. I got to the point of an offer and I turned them down
Right.
because I just didn't have a good feeling about it. And some you have to go with your intuition, especially with women and especially with your partner and especially with a job.
I know.
You have to follow that. It's very important. Usually your gut instincts aren't going to steer you wrong.
No, it's not.
Um, yeah.
And see, everything, even though we're talking outside of business, but this is business. Business is about
Oh,
relationships.
my wife is my ultimate boss. I don't care what job I have.
There you go. That's how it should be. My
Yeah.
ex-wife wasn't. That's why she's an ex-wife. But that's the thing. It's like when you go into any company, there's a certain fit on both ends, and
Hmm.
sometimes you have to look past the money. Sometimes you have to look past the benefits. Is this going to work? And eventually, you know, if you're in the right career arc or the right career path, however you want to phrase it, it'll work itself out.
Yeah.
And I had old school bosses. I mean, very old school bosses used to tell me that all the time. And I'd be damned. I can say in my mid 50s, it's worked out. You know, hey, sometimes you have to make that leap and do stuff on your own too. So,
Yeah.
what's wrong with that? So,
Hmm.
I'm going to get your prediction. Is Philly going to return to the Super Bowl?
No.
No.
Unfortunately. You watched any news today of all the free agents they lost? They'll here's the default. If you and I could talk sports forever, but the default is the NFC is extremely weak.
Yeah.
And by default, the Eagles could make a run again and be in the NFC title game again, but by their defense is not going to be nearly as good as last year's was because they're losing so much talent.
Yeah.
But they'll replace it, and you got to pay Jalen Hurts, and that's going to hurt their salary cap. Um,
Funny. Hurts, huh?
it hurts good though because he's a great quarterback.
Yep. Yeah, he
It's
is.
unfortunately, and offensively, the Eagles are fine. They need a new punter. They have to get rid of the punter.
Hmm.
Their kicker's fine. Their defense is going to be very young next year.
Right.
And I mean, if Aaron Rodgers goes to the Jets, who's the second best quarterback in the NFC? Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions.
I know.
So, and then Jimmy Garoppolo's a Raider now. So it's Yeah, it's not the NFC is weak is what I'm trying to say. So they do have a shot, but I think they would get torched at any AFC team right now. This was the defensive
So you're not
side.
thinking much of Derek Carr, huh?
No, not at all. No. Average quarterback.
I had to mention him because I mean, hey, he went to the Saints. I had to give him some.
Yeah, but I would still take Jared Goff over him.
Yeah. Oh,
The
yeah.
Lions are an improved team, and no, Derek Carr. Who's he throwing to besides the one receiver?
Thomas. Yeah. I mean, that's about
Comes-
it. Kamara, he's playing 4 straight weeks and then he's off another 3. So, I mean,
No, Derek Carr. There's nothing scary about Derek Carr.
what about the AFC since they're so loaded over there? Who's your far and away number 1 there? Because
there's no far and away. It's so good. It's such a good conference.
yeah,
Josh Allen and the Bills can win. Mahomes can win every year, depending if even if he's not healthy, he wins like he did last year. He hurt his ankle and still beat everybody.
yeah.
If Rodgers goes to the Jets, they're a contender. The Bengals are always a contender. The Ravens, I wish was a contender, but I think they're on the downswing right now.
Yeah.
Especially if they get rid of Lamar Jackson.
Is he going to Miami or Washington like everybody trying to say that he is?
Oh my God, I don't know what's going on. I think he's going to stay at Baltimore for another year, and then because I don't know, he's a weird. He didn't hire an agent, so he's in a weird situation right now.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be back at Baltimore by default, but he's not going to be happy about it. And like the Browns are good. Who else is in that division? The Steelers, obviously. Kenny Two Gloves Pickett. He's average, but they're still a pretty good team.
You never know. He might take off in that second or third year, you know.
The only thing he's going to take off is those 2 gloves, and then
you got one hell of a way of putting stuff. But
any quarterback who's number 8 for the Steelers, I don't trust. He just looks like a younger Tommy Maddox.
That's actually a pretty good comparison. I didn't even think about that.
So it's scary, but yeah. I don't see the Eagles getting back to it's statistically any Super Bowl losing team rarely ever makes it back the next year. True. So I'm gonna go with the stats.
And that's exactly why
I'm rooting for them, though. I'm rooting for them, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't.
All right, so let's settle one other debate because since we're talking sports, everybody's going to talk about it. Better, Jordan or LeBron, and why?
Jordan.
All right, and why?
I don't even think it's a comparison, to be honest with you.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's completely different eras of basketball. Yeah. But Jordan's the best. I mean, a better debate for me would be Jordan or Wilt Chamberlain, to be honest with you, who's the best player.
Yeah.
LeBron's a great player, but he's in a different era of like a much softer league. Like this league is soft now with no defense.
Yeah.
No one plays defense. They just score and score and score. So Jordan, I think you could put in today's era and he still would dominate. If you put LeBron in Jordan's era, I don't think he'd be as good. No. That's just my opinion.
Well, that's just my opinion is Jordan has a lot more will than LeBron. You know, LeBron may have better overall talent, but Jordan just had that will. I mean, there was so many people that could have been better than Jordan in that era, and he broke everybody down. You know?
Yeah, it's a shame with what happened with Kobe because Kobe is the same player as Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
He's a killer, and that's the kind of. I don't see LeBron James and think he's a killer. I just think he's a prima donna who has talent. That's kind of what I see. I look at LeBron and I'm like, I got to buy an AT&T phone because he just made that commercial come out. I look at Jordan and I'm like, I don't want him facing my team. I'm going to lose.
Came around at the perfect time too, because I mean, he was pre-internet. He was just on the verge of everything that we're transitioning into now. And see, LeBron has the benefit of social media, a global league, so forth and so on. But like you said, the game is a lot softer. And one of my biggest problems with that, if it's a lot softer, why doesn't he have 10 rings? You know what I'm saying? I mean, he should easily have 10 rings in this era.
Let me just answer your question with a question.
Go ahead.
Which movie's better, Space Jam or Space Jam 2?
Obviously, Space Jam, because I never even watched Space Jam 2.
And Space Jam 2 stars LeBron James. So there's your answer. Right
There you go. Because I never even saw it. So
yeah, that's the point.
I didn't even know until like a few weeks ago that it was a Space Jam 2. So that tells you a lot right there. That's another thing. You have so much information coming from everywhere now, whereas you had a tunnel focus with Jordan, I believe. Yeah. So it was easy to buy into it. And then I don't look at the hardcore fans of basketball or any sport. I look at the people that are outliers. If my mother's asking me about Michael Jordan, then I know he's pretty damn good.
Yep.
I never heard her once say anything about LeBron. So
no, and she probably knows players like Kobe and Iverson and players with heart. Vince Carter. I think all those players are better than LeBron. They just didn't last as long.
I know.
Those are, and my favorite sport is baseball. That's always, I could literally tell you all the players, all like I love baseball. And hopefully your team down there, Tampa, gets a new stadium in a couple years.
And see, that's the thing. I don't even have a team anymore.
Florida's. What's cool about the Marlins is they're the first team with a female general manager.
Right.
So I don't know what's going to happen with them, with their success, regardless of the gender aspect to it. But it's a cool story.
Well, see, one thing with baseball, and I'll let you finish that part of the story before I forget. You can plug in players and their stats will translate. You might be in a different stadium, a different home stadium, but if you're hitting 340, at worst, if you get traded or you sign as a free agent, you should still hit close to 340. You should still hit close to 40 home runs and so forth. But you do that in other sports, it doesn't work. It's a team game, but there's a one-on-one aspect between that pitcher and the batter, So you're still going to get your stats.
I don't agree. I disagree.
I'm telling you, it happens more than that. Why do you disagree?
Look at last year and look at Nick Castellanos when he signed with the Phillies. Like the year before when he was with the Reds, he had 34 home runs, 100 plus RBIs, and he came to the Phillies and he was awful last year.
How did he sign? Was he traded or did he sign?
No, he signed as a free agent.
Really? Okay.
And he was god awful last year, and we're hoping he bounces back, or we're stuck with a horrible contract with Nick Castellanos. No, it's just it's the human element.
I have that, but I'm just saying it happens more often that player is still going to be that same player. I'm not saying all of them, but go ahead.
No, so that's it does translate to an extent, but it really just depends because they're constantly changing the rules of the game to try to make it appeal to more people. Right. So like this year, you're going to see that they got rid of the defensive shift to try to speed up the game. They made the bases bigger, so they're like pizza boxes on the field now. So they have more steals. So like they keep tinkering with it to try to make it more appealing to the mass fan.
Right.
Which can affect stats as well when it comes to, because COVID changed baseball with that 2020 season when that whole 2020 season was crazy. I don't know if you see in the back. Look at this. I have a cardboard cutout of myself. See that? So, because when I was in the Ravens, I bought a cutout for the 2020 season. And I was one of those fans in there. So I went down and got that. I was done. So do you remember that season with like the craziness of life having to go on, but like everything was shut down? It was just weird.
Alternate universe. That's what it felt like.
Yes, and we will never see that again in our lifetime.
No, not at all. And here's the thing. With baseball, I think 1994 started the decline
the strike.
Of baseball. Yeah. And they never really recovered over that. I mean,
they recovered with steroids. They got the Barry Bonds and with Sosa and McGuire. That's what brought people back. Steroids saved baseball, and now everyone gets reprimanded for it.
But I mean, I don't think. Put it like this: like my father and my grandfather, that generation was into baseball stats. I mean, they would pick up the paper and they would read that Pete Rose had this, They always read about Ricky Henderson. And I don't hear the average person talk about baseball. And to me, that decline happened in the 90s because when they did that strike, it was like that was the worst time for them to have that strike, you know?
Yeah.
And people was like, you know what, screw this. I'd rather watch football, blah, 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 you know?
Yeah.
It didn't help that Jordan was in his prime and all this other stuff at the same time that happened. I mean, there was no transition to me, and just looking on the outside that they ever came back up. And it's just like hockey. I just feel like people, if you love hockey, you love hockey. But there's nobody on the outside that comes into hockey.
Right.
And I've enjoyed it because, I mean, growing up all those years, watching the Caps, watching the Pens, just watching all of that stuff go on, I enjoyed the sport, and I could actually follow the puck. A lot of people can't follow the puck on the ice and so forth, and they bitch about it. And remember, I don't know if you remember when Fox had the NHL and they put that line with the puck to try to follow the puck.
I remember that.
Like a video game or whatever. And people were like, what in the living hell is this?
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, it's stuff like that. But soccer is the worldwide sport. I mean, you know,
I'm excited for that. I'm excited for the World Cup in 2026. Definitely want to go to a game when it comes to Philadelphia Eagles Stadium.
Oh, really?
They won one of the bids. Yeah, I think New York, Philly, Seattle, obviously. That's going to be fun.
I've been to one World Cup game, surprisingly. One of my coworkers, she took me to the one where the Commanders play at.
Who?
Well, the Washington football team, Redskins, whatever name they wanted to be that week. Yeah. But we went to that game. I think it was Spain against. I'm trying to think of the other team.
Well, it wasn't United States.
It wasn't United States. I want to say it was either El Salvador. That's who it was.
Okay.
Yeah, so we watched that game, and it was like 1-0 Spain because that El Salvadorian goalie, I mean, he was like all they had. I mean,
I got to ask you a question too, because you are one of the few people I know actually watches wrestling too at our age. Did you go to any of the recent WrestleManias in Florida?
I have not.
Because I 100% am going next year to WrestleMania 40 in Philly.
There you go. How much are they running those tickets now?
Not bad. I mean, it depends where you want to sit, but you can go to because it's a 2-night show now. Because
of the Hall of Fame and all.
I went to WrestleMania 35 in New York with my dad, and that wasn't bad. That was like $150 a ticket.
Okay.
So it's not like you can go. It's not the worst.
Right.
It's not like going to a baseball game for $20 a pop, but it's WrestleMania. So
that's one event I have never gone to.
I highly recommend it. I've been to 2 WrestleManias.
I did go to a Great American Bash.
That is not the same.
That is not the same, but this is NWA actually had it. But I
recently went to in my first AEW pay-per-view too, just to see what that was like.
How was it?
Do you watch that at all, AEW?
Nope.
It's in Florida too. You should watch it. They're in Jacksonville.
Back into.
I went because it's more. I went to see. I don't know. So if you don't watch it, you might not know who MJF is.
I do know MJF.
I watched him win the championship I was at that show where he won the title.
Oh God!
That was so much fun. Yeah.
I actually remembered when he was on Rosie O'Donnell's show.
For
some odd reason, I think I had it on in my office or whatever. And then when it showed him years later, I was like, that was that kid? Okay.
But yeah, WrestleMania, you pay for every wrestler comes out with a huge fireworks display, and like it's just, and you're outside at like the Giant Stadium or Eagle Stadium, or the one that recently was near you was at the Tampa Bay Bucks Stadium.
Right.
And they're just they go all out. It's like 4th of July with a wrestling show, with a concert. It's like it's a whole crazy experience. You should go next time it comes to Florida.
I need to get into it again. I mean,
You don't even need to, because the best part about WrestleMania is, like, my father doesn't watch any of it, but he has a great time because
right.
they show you a whole 15-minute recap before the wrestlers come out for each match. And then it's like, here's the recap and there's the match. That's why he likes it, because there's no talking. It's just recap match, recap match. So you're good. You don't need to get in.
I would definitely put that on my list. So, do
Yeah.
you have anything else that you want to present out there to folks? You know, I guess that are challenged, looking for work and so forth. Any message that you want to give them?
Just don't be discouraged and keep trying. It's really all you can do, even if you have to take. It depends on what your goals are. So if your goal is to start here, end up here, you have to be realistic with yourself. Like, you can't expect to walk out with your new degree and just have every employer waiting there begging for you to work at their company, because there's so much there. Here, the way I can say this is, there are so many quality people out there right now that it's hard for, like, me as a recruiter to sell you to come to us sometimes. It really is a company and a brand image. So like, my last company didn't market at all, so no one ever heard of them, but my current company does. So it makes life as a recruiter easier when people have heard of your company and they know what you do.
Right.
So marketing is so important, and HR and marketing should work together more. And because that's something I'm trying to update our accounts to make our logos look great. And there's only so many hours in a day. I have so many things I want to keep doing. So hopefully I'll get there. But my words of advice for people is just to just stay positive and keep trying. Just know that there's a lot of competition out there. So if you're not hearing back, always reach out to, like I always tell people, you can email me, you can reach out to me. I will always get back to you. It might not be right away sometimes, but I will always respond to you. So just don't be discouraged. Just keep trying.
Well, everybody, this is the business perspective. It's been a pleasure, and we're definitely going to do this one again.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.